event this evening is called A Mother from Gaza. And it's a very special event because we're talking about a newly released book. This is the launch of this book. The book is called Gaza Mom, Palestine, Politics, Parenting, and Everything in Between by Laila El-Haddad. And we're very happy to have Laila here tonight to talk about the book and do some reading, some excerpts of the book so that we can get to know more about what I feel is a really great way to understand the situation on the ground in Palestine, but specifically in Gaza, and the way it's affecting people. We often characterize the situation simply by what we hear about it through the news, and it's often dominated by the depressing aspects of war and politics and so on, but more often than not, the people are lost in the discussion. And I think Laila, in her writing about life and family and the trials of living in Gaza and traveling in and out, does a really great job of contextualizing the humanity in the midst of the inhumanity in Gaza. And so Laila is a blogger, a political analyst, a social activist, and most importantly, a parent of two from Gaza. And she received her BA from Duke University and her MPP from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Since November of 2004, she's authored an award-winning blog known as Gaza Mom. From 2003 to 2006, she was the Gaza stringer for the Al Jazeera English website, and she's also contributed regularly to the BBC, Guardian Unlimited, and other various media outlets. So please join me in welcoming the author of Gaza Mom and our speaker this evening, Laila El-Haddad.
I was hoping my brother would make it here on time, but he's not here. So yesterday, incidentally, my brother and I were partaking in our biannual Eid phone marathon, speaking with relatives the world over to wish them a blessed Eid and assuage our built-up guilt at not having done a better job of keeping in touch. One of those we spoke with was our eldest maternal uncle in Jordan, he's a doctor, retired, and recently had come back from a trip to Gaza. It was a long absence, and he had been there shortly after my own trip there this summer. And so I asked, in a matter of conversation, a question that I myself never quite know how to answer. So, how did you find it? His response, abnormal and normal. I mean, how can you assess such a situation? And the truth is, there is no easy way to assess Gaza, as my uncle put it, to understand Gaza. I mean, we have the bleak statistical indicators, we have the concerned reports from aid organizations, the eyewitness testimonies from activists on the ground, the coverage from local and regional media telling of the latest assassination, bombing, internal feud, and occasionally Guinness record that has been broken. We hear the rehearsed rebuttals and denials from Israeli government spokespersons, Zionist sympathizers, and their ilk. We read contradictory reports about the situation, how the economies are thriving, and the people are getting on just fine, and how there is plenty of food, so what is the problem? We might even hear people themselves saying they're doing just fine, namely because more than anything, they resent being portrayed as victims over and over again. So how does the average person understand Gaza in the face of all of this? To truly understand Gaza, you would need to spend a very long time there, something few of us can afford to do. And even then, maintaining perspective and having the ability to convey what you see becomes a nearly impossible task. One woman I remember that I met shortly after the elections in Gaza, the historic Palestinian elections, said to me, and shortly after the sanctions had been placed on Gaza and the West Bank, after those elections, said to me simply, "Our lives are incomprehensible." And this is where the importance of new media like blogging comes in. Now, I won't pretend that's how my own blog started, but it certainly evolved into this. Originally, my blog, formerly named A Mother From Gaza, and now Gaza Mom, namely because GazaMom.com was infinitely easier to remember than a-mother-from-gaza.blogspot.com, was a family diary of sorts. It also became my coping mechanism for surviving under occupation and maintaining my wits and my wit. Now, for the full story, you'll have to read the book, which incidentally you can buy after the talk. In my blog's earlier days, I struggled with many of the questions beginning bloggers might face, and this was in 2004. Why was I blogging, and who was I blogging for? And what right did I have to blog about Gaza anyway, if I didn't have it half as bad as the person in the village just north of us? My feelings were confounded by the fact that mine was the only blog at the time from Gaza. I felt a heightened sense of responsibility and urgency to immediately report every minute detail unfolding in front of me. But it was never enough. How could I make people see what I was seeing? How could I help them understand the situation the way I did? How could I help them live Gaza? What should I be blogging about, and will it make sense to the audience, or will I simply be confusing matters more? Was I saying the right thing? Was it accurate? Could I back it up? Did I need to? The answers and the reassurances most often came, surprisingly enough, in the form of comments on my blog. In 2004, about a year after the Iraq War, I received one of my first memorable comments, of many to come. It was from a middle school teacher in Florida. Now, honestly, I can't remember if it was a middle school or high school, but she was a school teacher from Florida. And she told me that she had taken to reading an entry from my blog every week to her students to help them understand the situation there. And that, that in of itself came as a shock to me, that she had elected to do this. But the whammy came in the end, when she also revealed she was a U.S. Army reservist and was being deployed to Iraq the following week, confiding that she was against the war but had to go anyway. The comment shook my own understandings and belief, much in the same way I imagine my blog did to her and to her students. I received another comment shortly after that from an Israeli journalist, a left-wing journalist, who told me she was an avid reader of my blog and explained that her brother was a soldier in the Israeli army serving in Rafah. And when after his service, overtaken by guilt, he had to be institutionalized, she read my blog to him. My blog eventually turned into a portal to an isolated Gaza for the outside world, a portal that, based on the many comments I received over the years, accomplished what the mainstream media could not, helped people understand Gaza. But unless you are a religious follower of my blog, from the start, keeping up with the time gaps and the narrative shifts became harder and harder to do over the years. This is where the book comes in. It lays out my blog entries, my reportage, my articles, my photos, my reflections, my rants, my occasional live-tweeted narratives and recipes. And it covers a period of 6 years, from the months just prior to the Israeli disengagement till the present. Now, I have to admit, when Helena Coban first suggested the idea, I was skeptical. Who wants to read things I wrote 5 years ago, or even 3 or 2? There may be gripping pieces, but why disrupt the flow with reflections about raising my son or giving birth to my daughter or having problems in airports or border crossings? And I had to constantly remind myself that occupation in and of itself is disruptive. And here I am reminded of what cartoonist and journalist Joe Sacco, whom I interview in the book, had to say about the importance of recording the past. In his latest book, Footnotes from Gaza, he covers an event that happened in Gaza in 1953 in southern Gaza and Rafah, in which my mother was involved, and it was very personal for me. And I asked him why, and then he shifts to 2003 continuously, back and forth in the book, and a period of house demolitions of Rafah. And I asked him why he chose to cover these periods, this time that was something that had already happened. And he said, events are continuous, and there is no closure, and there is pummeling after pummeling. So do we just forget the people who had their homes demolished then? And I had to continuously remind myself of that fact in writing this book, which provides a single voice amidst a sea of silenced voices, a narrative that attempts to bridge the political and cultural divide and fill the void in the mainstream coverage of Gaza. And it is all the more important in the face of a concerted effort to silence Palestinian narratives, both in explicit and unseen ways, attempts to discredit and delegitimize writers or simply exclude them from the conversation altogether. I've personally seen it over the years, increasingly in talkbacks and commentaries online. You're either not articulate enough or you're too erudite. You're too privileged to be authentic, or you're not sophisticated enough in your language or your analysis. You're too distant from Palestine or too immersed in it. You're not Palestinian enough to comment on Palestine. The incessant barrage of criticism adds to the frustration many young Palestinian bloggers feel. The result is many of them simply elect to stop writing together, and this is something I've noticed in my conversations with them over the years, most recently this summer. I mentioned one of these bloggers in my book. Her name was Hiba. She too was a mother of two and had one of the most poetic and moving blogs I had read. But she stopped blogging, and the reason she gave me was it was just purely out of pure personal frustration. I felt besieged from within and unable to share my mind with other people, and she was just overwhelmed with this criticism that she was getting on her comment section. So I felt an obligation to continue to speak, not simply for Hiba, but for all of Gaza. The average person not heavily involved in Palestinian issues understands very little about who Palestinians are and what occupation means as a result of the way the media covers Palestine. The mainstream media is not only reactionary, but unhelpful. And I go back to Joe Sacco here. He said, it does not educate people. It only confuses them more in an attempt to attain so-called objectivity. The book attempts to give you a personal understanding of the impact of Israel's occupation policies and what it means to be Palestinian today. It is a window into Gaza during some of its most turbulent years, and into the violated but resilient lives we live as Palestinians. It is a story about mothering, homeland, identity, war, and survival. And with that, I'd just like to read a few passages from the book, if you will indulge me. And then maybe we can do a question and answer. The first passage is called Give Me Your Tired, October 6, 2005, Columbia, Maryland. What is it about kids and hijabi women that manages to clear a row of passengers in an airplane faster than the plague? Don't get me wrong, I don't mind the eye-rolling and huffs and puffs of agitated and clearly childless passengers one bit. It meant Yusuf and I got a whole row to ourselves. And despite the ceaseless wailing of the children in front of us, responding to a mother's vain attempts to read Barney Goes to the Zoo 20 different ways, Yusuf was an angel. I guess compared to Rafah crossing, this was a 5-star hotel. In case it's not clear already, my family and I have safely made it to the United States to visit my husband and brothers. It's taken me nearly a week to recover from the hellish journey across Rafah, which is still closed off, sealing in 1.5 million Palestinians. Bombs dropping behind us, which managed to shatter our living room windows, along with those of several nearby schools, F-16s swooping down into Gaza's skyline. I still can't believe we made it across. I've been having nightmares, and I'm stuck in the crossing with Yusuf, sitting on the floor with thousands of others, being told I can't get across. While in transit in London's Heathrow Airport, our flight coincided with a flight heading back to Tel Aviv. The bus that transported us from one terminal to another was full of holiday-happy Israelis chatting nonchalantly in a Hebrew that I half understood, arms laden with shopping bags from London boutiques. I wondered if they had ever met a Palestinian from Gaza, if they had the slightest idea what I had to go through to get here, or how it felt to cross Rafah with an 18-month-old child, or if they did but simply preferred to screen out that ugly reality from which their country was responsible from their lives. That is what their government's Gaza policy is about, after all. Out of sight, out of mind. In less than a few hours, they would be back to their homes, flying carefree to the same area of land from which it had taken me weeks in waiting to begin to travel, 24 hours to cross, several more days to rebook my flights which I had missed as a result of the closure, and another week to recover from. This is the daily irony of our existence. For now, I am just trying to enjoy my time here, to observe Ramadan, to recover, to take in the past few months, and every now and then when I hear a helicopter innocuously monitoring traffic, I duck for cover. I am still jittery and on edge, and the jagged transition from battered Gaza to picture-perfect suburbia USA is mentally taxing. And the next selection is called Just Another Gaza Friday, and it's dated April 8th, 2006. Location is Gaza City. I've always loved Fridays in Gaza. In the mornings, except for the lone garbage collector futilely sweeping the abandoned streets, and the municipality park that is littered with plastic cups, watermelon seeds, and mangled straws from the night before, the hustle and bustle of the city comes to a standstill. It is a serene, if lethargic time, an escape from the sea of chaos, uncertainty, and violence that grip our lives each waking day and night. For a few hours, things seem ordinary in a place where ordinary is an illusion. And it doesn't seem like anything can disrupt those moments, as if some force is saying to the madness that envelops us, come back another hour. Slowly, the streets come to life again as evening takes hold. This is Yusuf's favorite time. He likes to go out to the balcony, as we did yesterday, and people watch. Just take in the incongruous sights and sounds of another Friday in Gaza. In the park in front of us, children boisterously played football, women licked ice cream cones and chatted, and wedding motorcades, zeffet sayarat, which no matter what the season or situation, you can always expect to hear on Thursday and Friday evenings like clockwork, made their way to beachside hotels and lounges. They tirelessly honked their horns, in sync with live wedding debka music blaring out from portable speakers or played by live-for-hire bands seated in the back of rented pickup trucks decorated with carnations. Boys and relatives clamor for a standing space in the back of the trucks, dancing and clapping feverishly along with the music. Young children chase them down the street to join in the fun. If the wind is just right, the sky becomes a showcase of homemade kites, dancing and flirting with each other, challenging the physical bounds imposed on this battered area's residents, reaching the places they can only dream about, allowing them to navigate freedom, no matter how purposeless, for just a little bit. In the distance, the ubiquitous double thuds of artillery fire could be heard exploding a few kilometers away, increasing in number and intensity as the evening progressed, only to be drowned out ever so slightly by the cacophonous symphony of Friday blitheness, as if to say, not today, today you will not steal our moment. The evening passes and the clock strikes midnight, and suddenly the carriage transforms into a pumpkin again. The magic dissipates, the missiles strike, and 6 people are dead. Just another Gaza Friday. This piece is called I Complain, Therefore I Am, written from Gaza City on April 21st, 2006. I'm fairly certain I exist. Descartes tells me so, and before him Ibn Sina, and when my son drags me out of bed to play with him in the pre-dawn hours, I really know I do. So you can imagine how distraught I was when my existence was cast into serious doubt by a major airline. After booking a flight online with British Airways out of Cairo, the nearest accessible airport for Palestinians here, 8 hours and a border crossing away from Gaza, because the airport is incapacitated, I attempted to enter my passenger details, including country of citizenship and residence. Now, most people wouldn't give this a second thought, but being the owner of a Palestinian Authority passport, which one can acquire only on the basis of an Israeli-issued identification card, I have become accustomed to dealing with Kafkaesque complications in routine matters. And sure enough, in the drop-down menu of countries, I found the British Indian Ocean Territory, the Isle of Man, and even Tuvalu. But no Palestine. Now, I understand Palestine does not exist in any Western maps, much to the chagrin of my son, who is always looking for it. So I would have settled for Palestinian territories, though Palestinian Bantustans may have been more appropriate. Gaza Strip and West Bank, or even Palestinian Authority, as my pursuant to the Oslo Accords issued passport states. But none of these options existed, and neither, it seemed, did I. I was confused. Where in the world is Laila El-Haddad if not in Palestine, I wondered. Certainly not in Israel, as one of the many customer relations representatives casually suggested. I sent an email of complaint to British Airways, humbly suggesting that it amend the omission. Several days later, the reply came, "We are unable to assist you with your query via email. Please call your General Inquiries Department on ba.com, then select your country from the drop-down list." Now, I realize you don't need a PhD to work in one of these posts, but I assumed it was fairly self-evident from my first email that my country is not listed in the drop-down list. I explained this to Diana in a follow-up email and was told to contact my nearest General Inquiries Department. Now, if I were to take that literally, it would have been Tel Aviv, which I actually did call and was referred back to the UK. Instead, I opted for customer relations in the United Kingdom, whose web support told me there was no guarantee I would ever get a definite answer. I relayed the tale to my friend, whose own status as an East Jerusalemite is even more precarious than mine as a post-disengagement Gazan. Could it be, she posited, that there is no definite answer because we are not considered a definite people? I'll leave that for British Airways to answer. And incidentally, since the time of this email, it took about a year, but they eventually did add Palestine to the list. So, yeah, so one little success story there. This entry was written from Durham, North Carolina on February 26, 2007, and it was titled, "What is Gaza?" It's been nearly 2 months since we've returned from our most recent visit to Gaza. So, you can imagine how surprised I was when my nearly 3-year-old son Yusuf unexpectedly asked, "Mama, what is Gaza?" What is Gaza? I thought to myself, taking a moment to ponder what was most likely not intended to be a very profound inquiry. Is Gaza the Ma'bar, the border crossing? He prodded with uncertainty. Well, not really, I responded. That's part of it, but Gaza is a place. It's home. It's where Sidu and Teta are, I replied. Then why is it so hard to go there? He asked. And why do you ask so many questions? I wanted to say. And what an absolutely absurd question it was. Or was it? In the mind of my 3-year-old son, Gaza had been reduced to his experiences awaiting entry on borders, under the mercy of an unseen, unknown occupier that all the while claims it is not responsible for the same border. Leaving aside this peculiar fact, it is perhaps worth pondering Yusuf's question for a moment. What is Gaza? Or rather, what has Gaza become? The largest open-air prison, say some, an internment camp, a wasteland. Earlier this month, in yet another step towards isolating Gaza completely, Israel officially designated the area's border crossing between Gaza and Israel an international border. At first glance, this may seem insignificant. After all, the crossing is already inaccessible to most Palestinians and most recently Israelis. But the few Israelis who do cross into Gaza must now have their passports stamped and are registered as having departed the country. It is this paradox that is most exasperating of all. Israel continues to claim it is no longer responsible for Gaza. Gaza is a cesspool of misery and decay, and the source of much of its angst that it would much like to forget. But all the while, Israel continues to close its borders, control its population registry, control every last mundane detail of how we live our lives as Palestinians. So it should come as no surprise that a recent report by John Dugard, a South African law professor and the UN's Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territories, likened the situation in Gaza to apartheid South Africa in a report he issued on Tuesday. It is also no wonder that more and more people are beginning to speak about a future resolution in terms of a one-state solution. So what is Gaza? How do I answer Yusuf? Gaza is that strange, faraway place that takes days and sometimes weeks to get to. The place that no one wants to talk about anymore, that no one wants to hear about. The place that is at once occupied and free, that is neither this nor that. The place Israel has disengaged itself from, and the place it is now trying to erase. And most of all, the place that no one can provide answers about, least of all to a curious and confused little 3-year-old. This entry was written during the assault on Gaza, based on conversations I had had with my parents who were there, was written from Durham, North Carolina on January 12, 2009, and the title is The Gates of Hell, The Window to Heaven. I have a routine of sorts. I monitor the situation back home all day. I keep Al Jazeera English on continuously, as long as I am home, despite Yusuf's nagging to switch to cartoons. He stopped asking several days ago when, tearful and angry, I told him that Gaza is being bombed and that Sidu and Teta are in danger. If I leave home, I make sure my cell phone is near me at times. This evening, I'm at a friend's house, and my father calls me just before dawn prayers. Are you home? Are you there? I don't know what's going on, but our whole house is shaking. The whole house. The windows have blown up. Your mother is terrified. It's horrible. I don't know exactly where it is, and the radio hasn't broadcast anything about it yet either. Just continuous explosions all around and these clouds of white smoke everywhere. He goes on. His words are at once wary and weighed. I rush home to turn on the television again and see what information I can find online. He has the news before they do. Soon, Al Jazeera brings my free Taghreed back on the line. I hear her voice and imagine her sitting next to me, trembling as she usually does in such inexplicably terrifying moments as these, despite having covered Gaza for years. People cannot find places to stay anymore. They go from one area as they were ordered to leave by the Israelis to another, and there is no more room in the UN schools. I refuse to call them shelters, she says, because they are not. There are like 1 or 2 bathrooms for 1,000 residents. I met people sleeping in the public garden at Shifa Hospital, she continues. My father tells me he has seen people out on the street, entire families, living, sleeping, surviving. His cousin moved from Tel El-Hawa to his brother's house nearby. One resident in Tel El-Hawa describes the evening as Israel having opened the gates of hell onto them, the Shoah that Deputy War Minister Matan Vilnay said he would unleash onto Gaza last year. I see an Associated Press picture on my computer of a jovial Israeli soldier posing with 2 of his weapons with a toothy smile. I then read an article in Haaretz by Amos Harel, writing from the ruins of Netzarim, quoting an Israeli tank commander saying he rather likes it in Gaza because it's interesting there. Other young soldiers say they're excited, anxious to get in on the action, to shell and snipe to death, this being their first war. A 1-year-old girl, Rola Salha, was killed today. She was Noor's age. I think of the smiley, war-hungry soldier and I wonder if he got his kick. My father and I continue speaking. We learn Israeli forces have closed in on Tel El-Hawa and Navy gunships are shelling the city again. My parents speak to Yusuf for a while as I hear the explosions echoing over the speaker and machine gun fire, and the aftermath of phosphorus bombs over the city on my television. He complains of an ear infection. The fear is salient. It is suffocating. It is in the air, friends say, and no one knows what's coming next. There is nowhere to turn except the heavens above. And so many people in Gaza have taken to doing just that. They were waking up for special pre-dawn prayers, Qiyam al-Layl, in the last third of the night, a window of time when believers feel especially close to God, and when it is said He is especially close to our calls upon Him, and supplications and prayers are most likely to be answered. And so they tremble, and they wait, and they pray during the small window to heaven for the gates of hell to be closed, until it is dawn once again. I'll just end with one more entry, and then maybe, I guess we have some time for questions and answers. This one was also during Kasled from Durham on December 30th, 2008, and it was called Bloodied in Gaza. There is a complete blackout in Gaza now. The streets are as still as death. I'm speaking to my father, Laila El-Haddad, a retired physician who lives in Gaza City, on Skype from Durham, North Carolina, where I have been since mid-2007. The month Gaza's borders were hermetically sealed by Israel and the blockade of the occupied territory further enforced. He is out on his balcony. It is 2 a.m. I can only see gray plumes of smoke slowly rising all over the city. Everywhere I look, he says, as though they were some beautiful, comforting byproduct of some hideous, malicious event. My father was out walking when the initial strikes began. I saw the missiles falling and I prayed. The earth shook, the smoke rose, the ambulances screamed, he told me. My mother was working her shift in the Red Crescent Society when one of the police stations behind the clinic was leveled. Now, 3 days later, they are trapped in their own home. My father takes a deep restorative sigh before continuing. Ehud Barak has gone crazy. He's gone crazy. He's bombing everywhere and everything. No one is safe. Explosions are audible in the background. They sound distant and dull over my laptop speakers but linger like an echo in Death's Valley. They evoke terrifying memories of my nights in Gaza only 2 years ago, nights that till this day haunt my 4-year-old son who refuses to sleep on his own. Can you hear them? My father continues. Our house is shaking. We're shaking from the inside out. My mother comes to the phone. Hello, dear, she mutters, her voice trembling. I had to go to the bathroom, but I'm afraid to go alone. I wanted to perform wudu before prayer, but I was too scared. Remember the days when we would go to the bathroom together because you were too afraid to go alone? She laughs at the thought. It seems amusing to her now that she was too scared to find death in a place of relief, that she is now terrified of the same seemingly ridiculous scenario. It was really the fear of being alone. When you hear the news before it becomes news, you panic for clarity. You want someone to make sense of the situation, to package it into comprehensible terms and locations, just to be sure it's not you this time. It's strange, my whole body's shaking. Why is that, she rambles on, continuous explosions audible in the background. There they go again, one boom after another, 15, before that 1 or 2, maybe 20 total so far. Counting and systemizing the assaults makes them easier to deal with. They're more technical, more remote. We speak to each other throughout the day. Last night she called to let me know there were gunships overhead, as though there was something I could do about it, as though my voice could somehow make them disappear. Eventually her panic subsided. The rains of death continue to fall in Gaza, and silently the world watches. And silently governments plotted, how shall we make the thunder and clouds rain death onto Gaza? And will it all be made to be seem in the end of the day as a response to something? It will all be made to seem in the end of the day as a response to something. Rockets, broken truces, irreconcilability. As though the situation were completely acceptable in the period prior. But it is the prisoners' burden to bear. They broke the conditions of their incarceration. Nevertheless, there are concerns for the humanitarian situations, so long as they do not starve. The warden improves the living conditions now and then in varying degrees of relativity, but the prison doors remain sealed. And so when there are 20 hours of power outages in a row, the prisoners wish there were only 8 or 10 and dream of the days when there were just 4. No one has left their homes since Saturday. The streets were full of people the first few days of the attacks. Monday morning, 5 sisters from one family were killed when Israeli warplanes attacked a mosque next to their home. 4-year-old Jawahir Anwar, 8-year-old Dina Anwar, 12-year-old Sahar Anwar, 14-year-old Ikram Anwar, 17-year-old Tahrir Anwar. The small shop down the street from my parents' home next to the King's Mosque, where many of the Rimal neighborhood's affluent residents attend, opens for a little while after prayer. My father goes and gets whatever he can while he can. They have 1 package of bread left, but insist they're okay. Those with children are the ones who are truly suffering. Ramadan's grandchildren will only sleep in her arms now. They're wetting their pants again. My son Yusuf chimes into the conversation unceremoniously, popping his head into my laptop screen. Sido, I like the fattoush you used to make. Sido, are you okay? Habibi, when we see each other again, if we see each other again, I'll make it for you, he promises. The very possibility seems to comfort him, no matter how illusory. It is my daughter Noor's birthday on January 1st. She will be 1 year old. I cannot help but think, who was born in bloodied Gaza today? All right. Thank you.